that I like to talk is I find, especially in this situation, the dialogue is much more stimulating than a lecture. I'm not completely familiar with your the structure and the theme of your class, but I know that I've been called a lot of things. One of them has never been treasure, though. So that's unusual for me. What I figured I would do is, in the context that I've been invited here to tell you about myself as an artist, I'm just going to tell you briefly about that. But then Xavier would be here, and I imagine much more of a dialogue of questions that you have, whether about the work itself, or whether they're about the relevance of South Florida to me, if it's relevant in any way. Before we do that, I teach in the Honors College. I teach 4 classes. I'm like your professor, Professor Pfeiffer, in the sense that we both teach exclusively in honors. And so I teach Reacting to the Past course. And then I also teach an Aesthetics and Values course, where I hope that you all come on March 20th. We have the students actually curate, install, organize a show of professional working artists in Miami. And we have it in the Frost Art Museum. It's an Honors College event. And none of you look interested in any way, but I might tell you the next thing. So art, write it off. Frost Museum, write it off. Honors College Student Curator Show. The students in the class have found a sponsor that gives free wine at the opening. And this year they increased that with another sponsor that's giving free cheese. And then another one has gotten free desserts. So and it counts as an honors hour. It's the best honors hour of all of them. You get wine, cheese, and dessert, March 20th. Okay, and then there are 2 other classes that I teach that I can tell you more about later, because if you can afford it, it's one of the best memories that you would have of your undergraduate career. I teach 2 study abroad classes that are Honors College study abroad classes. One of them is I take students to Italy. We're there for 30 days. We go to Rome, Florence, Cinque Terre, and we stay in a sanctuary in the mountains. Then we go to Venice. And then I teach another one, Summer B. We're in France for 31 days. And you have your own dorm room in Paris for the duration of the month of July. So at the end of the class, you really feel like a Parisian. And it counts as an upper division honors course. So you get the 6 credits of any course. It's just if you can afford it or not is the main thing, because I think everybody, if it was the same price as another class, would jump at that. Anyhow, any questions or anything? Okay, so I'm talking in a room alone. All right, so let me see if I can get this to work. I think that might be a good idea, yeah. Not too much, because if not, they will certainly fall asleep. And I don't want them to, I think they might fall asleep, but I don't want them to.
Is that too dark?
Well, I'm going to go through this quickly, and then we can ask questions, but it's the best way to probably see these, okay? And I don't think you really need to take notes about any of this. Okay, so Miami is relevant to me in a way that the first citizen of Miami, the first registered citizen of Miami, was a Bahamian immigrant, right? The idea to found the city of Miami came from a woman, which is extremely unusual, so that you have an immigrant that's the first registered citizen of a city, and then you have a major city founded by a woman. It's not that old. And although there were people here before Europeans came, there weren't that many. It's not like it was a massively populated area like Mexico City. So everybody kind of is schizophrenic culturally here. We're all a mix of all different cultures. And that makes me really feel at home, because my father's French, my mother from the French Alps, my mother's from Ohio, and I was born in England. My wife is Cuban with Chinese and Norwegian heritage. And so I have 3 children that I don't know what they are, but they're all born in Miami, so it's like they're Miamians. They're not Americans, they're just Miamians. So so when I'm in France and I see my French family, it's like, oh, here's the American part of the family. And then when I see my mother's side, it's like, oh, here's the French part of the family. I never feel completely at home at any place, right? It's not like, France, this is my home. America, this is my home. I'm somewhere in the middle. And that's really confusing culturally. You have this not a strong cultural tradition and identity, because you're kind of in flux. But at the same time, my friend that I did a project with, Richard Blanco, who's Cuban, well, conceived in Cuba, born in Madrid and raised in the US, has the same kind of mix. And he says that he just feels like he's always on vacation. And so I approach it like, you can come over here, you're not going to see anything, and you're looking at your phone, and that's not really appropriate, because you did walk late into class by 15 minutes, and then you're sitting in the corner looking at your phone. I'm sorry, I know they're your students, but that just... All right, okay, so what I do is I make large oil paintings, and I do works on paper. It's very strange because in a certain way, I'm like a traditional artist in that I do these flat two-dimensional objects that serve no utilitarian purpose. Okay, this is a longer talk, and I'm going to skip through it because it's not particularly exciting for you to see this. Maybe none of it's exciting, but if I go through the whole talk, which is like 45 minutes, they're going to walk out or fall asleep or throw chairs at me. So I did paintings for a long time, and as Professor Pfeiffer said, I actually went to FIU for part of my undergraduate career, and then I went on to Yale for graduate school, which was wonderful because my father grew up in France during World War II, and he didn't even finish middle school. I mean, kind of interrupted, right? And so I was really the first one to go to get a terminal degree in my family, so that was a big deal for me. And I learned a lot there. It was very difficult. You guys, you're all, in my experience, the Honors College students have special capacity to perform at the level of the students at Yale. But the thing is that a lot of, and I say this with love, but a lot of FIU students are wimps. No, I'm serious. Like, you get a B and you freak out, or, and without being disrespectful, like you guys walking late and it's no big deal. There, I would have teachers tear up my drawings. And they would come into my studio and say, and these are people that are in art history books, like really, well-known painters that you look up to. And they'd walk into my studio uninvited and say, what is this shit you're doing? Why are you here? Remind me why you're here. Remind yourself why you're here. And people would cry and things, and it wouldn't move them at all. So anyhow, and I remember, I'll tell you one story, just to give you an idea. I was there because I knew how to paint. I wasn't there for I'm not like you guys. You can all write better than I can. I'm a painter, right? I never wrote. That was irrelevant to me. So you're all better writers than I am. And you're probably faster readers and things like that. I was there because I paint. But we had to take every year one class outside of the art department to get our master's degree in painting and printmaking. So I was like, man, what do I take? And so I took the Works of Knighthood, which was all medieval literature about knights. I was like, that's cool. I like war and people killing each other in novels. That sounds really fun, like entertaining. And I took it. It was a small seminar. And I was a little intimidated. It was, I think, my first or second semester at Yale. And, there's the reputation of these genius students. And we read the first book, and I'm a good student, I'm disciplined, but I'm not the best academic, but I'm very disciplined. So I could do any class and get an A, but I'd have to work hard. So he starts a discussion. He's like, what do you think of this first book? Everybody's quiet. It's like, I got this. I read the book. I have opinions about everything. So I was like, I'd like to say something. He goes, yes. And I'd say, well, I thought this, this, and this. He goes, excellent point. And, the guy had a turtleneck. It's total, like a beard, everything. Excellent point. And then, talk. And then by third week, I'm like this in class. Let me weigh in on this one here, guys. So hold on a second. I'm so cocky. I'm like, I fit at Yale, no problem. Feet, almost like my feet up on the chair in class. And then there was this girl, without meaning to pick, she had like the Coke bottle glasses, like really thick glasses. She was tiny, like a total introvert, and she raises her hand. And the professor goes, yes. And she goes, I'm having a real problem following these discussions in class. And he goes, why is that? And he's like, and she says, well, we're having the discussions in English. And it's very hard for me to switch from the medieval German to English. And I look at my book, and I have like the Penguin translation. in English, and so I'm just trying to slide it down. And so he goes, would you rather that we have the discussions in German? This girl's a freshman. She's like, that would be much easier for me, because going from German to English is difficult, but medieval German to English is very difficult. And so a lot of students are like, yes, that would be a great change. And I'm like, wait a second, this can't happen. Eins, zwei, drei is all I know. And luckily this one guy raises his hands and goes, no, the class is cross-listed for German and world literature, and I'm a world literature major, whatever, so you can't do that, because then I would be out in that statement. But that shows you the caliber, right? But anyways, it's just toughness. All right, I got kind of distracted. So after that, I was really into making paintings to kind of impact the world, to change the world. I wanted to really make these paintings about people power. And I still believe I still have a personal conviction about that. I believe in egalitarian principles, especially when it comes to law. I know that socially there are always going to be inequalities, but I don't think there should be any inequalities in front of it, and all of us should have the same legal rights, no matter what. And so I made these paintings, especially about people uprisings. And so these are some of them. And I drew on all different sources of popular uprisings throughout time, like I did Joan of Arc, Steve Biko, all of these different figures. And so these were paintings this was about 10 feet high and 20 feet long. And it was just basically an uprising. You can see some of the details, they're abstracted some. And so here's another one. So this is about, I would say 10 by 8 feet. And so it's just a person trying to claim power. Okay, let's move through. And then I'm skipping, 10 years of work. So I was doing this, and it was all about you need to change your life because you are not aware of these people, and my painting is going to make you aware of them, and it's going to make you aware about how to make a better world. Damn it. That's what the message of my paintings was. This is the right way. You're living the wrong way. Become aware of the right way. And then I had a personal change, which was I thought I had a real problem with advocating the right way, because although I had a personal conviction, to make that an objective statement was a real leap for me. So it's one thing to have a personal opinion about something, but it's another thing to say that this is the truth, because I find that personally the truth is incredibly subjective and sometimes unattainable. And when somebody claims to have the truth about something, I'm always suspicious about that. I always try to, when people are really confident about something and certain, and they're trying to tell you how to do it, whenever somebody does that to me, I'm always suspicious. Like, how do you know? And then I realized that I was doing that to people. And I was living in a small town in Pennsylvania. I had a teaching job there, and I was very uncomfortable. And I was walking down Main Street in Clarion, Pennsylvania. I got apprehended for bank robbery there, but that's a different story. They thought I was a bank robber, which was great, the helicopter and everything. And this other faculty member told me, you know why that is, right? I said, no. She goes, because you don't look like you belong here. I said, I don't? I didn't know, but it was a really small town. It was Pennsylvania, really rural, guns, boots, very conservative. And they had a certain worldview that didn't fit mine, and I was, turned around. And I went to their library, and they were giving away a set of encyclopedias. And so I'm going through this identity crisis. I'm alone in a cold town that's very conservative, or very different, because I'm conservative in many ways also about some things. But they were giving away an old set of encyclopedias. And I had a lot of time on my hands, aside from paintings. And I remember when I was a kid, I thought, if I could read the encyclopedia from A to Z, I would know everything. And it's like, I'm going to start doing this. So I started reading it, but the more I read it, the more I realized I wasn't accepting the premises for certain things. So that you would start reading an A, and then something would come up, and you wouldn't know what that was, or you wouldn't believe it, and then you'd have to go to N. And then you'd go to N, and you'd read something there, and then you'd have to go back to K. You know what I'm saying? To confirm things. And I found that the knowledge our systems of acquiring knowledge, to me, became entirely problematic. I didn't believe them. And also, when you looked at maps changed. Countries that used to exist didn't. And so rather than seeing reality as very fixed, I started seeing it as something that's constantly evolving. And so I decided, how can I make work that's about this? And so what I did is I tried to make artwork that was about my doubt about the reality of the world. And so what I did is I started taking different images from different encyclopedias that had no reference to each other and started putting them into the same paintings. And so here, this is Hegel. Then there's like a magnetic field in there, and then there's a wing, and there's a skull in back. And so I started putting all of these images together, and it's a little difficult to see here. I started putting all these images together, and they would create a narrative, but there was no logic to it. They were random juxtapositions. Let's see a few more. So here, this was the interior of a church. These were cow ribs. This was a pattern, and then around here, it's hard to see here, it's the life cycle of a mosquito. I just put all these things together. And random juxtapositions, things that you can't predict, that just happen, and they have no meaning in and of themselves. They're just, we always try to say there's a reason that happened. I had a friend that was murdered. She was raped and murdered, and then I spoke to another friend. She's like, this was a great lesson for all of us. And I said, what lesson? No, it's just a brutal act that ends with the death of somebody. There's nothing to learn from it. The act in itself has no meaning. And so my paintings became narratives without meaning. Here, this is the Colosseum in front of Fuchsia. And the way I would exhibit these, so this is the encyclopedia series. I did 100 of these, all random juxtapositions of different pages of the encyclopedia. And so I would show them as if they were pages of encyclopedia. So they'd all be next to each other like this. The groups would make it more compelling as far as the idea. And they would ask me, how do you want to arrange them? How do they go together? And I'd say, it doesn't matter. Just put them up any way. The order's totally random. Oh yeah, it's okay. See that? Like, at Yale, you would be out, right? Like, that's it. They're out, recorded, whatever. Because it doesn't matter. Okay, so, and then, so here, it started being things, and I started looking at my life kind of like the set of encyclopedias. So I was painting a skull once, and this guy comes by. It's rural Pennsylvania. He's like, Professor Bailey, you like skulls? I said, yeah. The next day, he brought me like an entire bag of deer skulls. Here you go. And I saw like every action in my life then was random. And then he invited me out to this farm where they had cows, and they would just when a cow died, they drag it out to these woods. And they said, you can go in there and take whatever you want. So I walked into these little woods, and there's all these cow carcasses. And it was so strange because I was only doing this because I was doing things randomly. Right? I had no structure to my life. But I realized that no matter what we think that we do have meaning and structure to our life, we don't. We're just following these random acts. And so that's how Miss Piggy became one of my most important paintings. When I was working on this one, it was like a breakthrough. Miss Piggy, and there was the ceramics teacher, and excuse my language, but he opens my studio door, he looks in, sees me painting Miss Piggy, and there's like encyclopedias ripped up everywhere, paintings of different things. Just looks at me and goes, you're fucking crazy. And he closes the door and keeps walking. And I go, okay, it's getting somewhere. And also, like, Miss Piggy is just as important as a scene from World War I, or MC Solar, the French rapper, or the inside of a church. Nothing is more important, like, a church is of the same importance as Miss Piggy in this series. And you can see how they would get arranged in different ways. What was really strange is that this work this is the commercial side, if you guess, it was sold really well. People really liked it. And one of the things that was so funny to me is that they started reading meaning into it. Oh yeah, the way that you put this and this together because of this. And it wasn't. It was just totally random. But I would always say, oh, I can't believe you figured that out. Because that was just as random. Okay, so there you go. Then I did some paintings that are, we'll skip these because it's not an art talk. And one thing Professor Pfeiffer was talking about commission. So I had this entire series of works on paper that you saw. And then this art collector. Here, you can turn your computer off because I don't think it relates to what I'm talking about right now. And I did drive an hour up here to come and talk. So remember, guys, when you're in class, it's like I'm speaking to you directly. I see you. And so I don't know what I just kick people out. But anyways, yeah.
They know what our agenda is.
So this guy came up to me. He's like, I want a big painting of these kinds of drawings that you're doing. I go, well, what do you mean? Because I can't make one of them a big painting because that would go against the idea of them, these random juxtapositions. He's like, okay, still make a painting. I go, so I'll make a painting for you, but I can't promise you that anything's going to be in it. He goes, okay, John, I just want something that when people walk into my condo, it kicks their ass. I go, okay, so 80 by 100 inches, and so I had, there's the Coliseum, there's like people running. The one before that you were seeing has the New York City subway system. It's all different kind of random juxtapositions. You can see they're fairly large. I started getting into systems of knowing. So this is because this kind of slipped away into an illustration of what I was trying to say, which was a defeat of it, and showed a transition. So this was the way that people thought the world was before Columbus's voyages, or Europeans thought the world was, and then after, so that reality changes. But this was a trap, because then I was illustrating the idea rather than really living it, right? Okay, let's get some of this. And then these are just, this one was really popular because everybody thought the guy was just smoking a giant joint. But I don't know, it was just an image that I got. I didn't know what it was, and it just worked into one of the paintings with these arrows. And they students, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But what was interesting to me is that the reaction to these paintings, in a sense, proved that we construct meaning in events in our lives. Right? Because in these paintings, there was no determined meaning. It was just random juxtapositions. But viewers always said that this was about this, so that people would purchase one because it had a personal meaning to them. But it was entirely invented. You understand? And I think we do that day to day. We give meaning to things often that's not there. It's a much easier way that if we have somebody that dies, to say there was a reason for this, rather than just, they actually just died. Those kinds of things. I was questioning the validity of it. Okay. I started using a lot of maps because maps are the coolest things in the world. I could show you like a little shape, like draw it out like this here. And you could say that's the US, like just by doing a little thing, you think of this entire country that has 330 million people and that has mountains and rivers, and you can reduce it to a little shape. That's an amazing thing we do intellectually. So I got interested after the encyclopedia thing, how do we process information? How do we construct our sense of reality? So here you have a map, and then in the middle you have a brain processing information. So it's kind of like our ideas, our reality comes from, hey, I'm almost done, and then you can, thanks for showing up. Yeah. One of the coolest things about me in my mind about processing information was the periodic table, so that we can get every element known to humanity into a letter or two and a little square on a chart, and that's like these are all the things that exist in the universe. That is so bizarre that we do that, but It's how we process it. And my kids that are young, they can identify, like, oh, this is the world. And it's this little thing. I've been there. And one time I had a show where people were walking up and saying, tapping on my painting because there was a map. I live right there. So that the painting became the place. It's a very strange thing we do in our mind. And so and I'm very obsessive compulsive, so I made a stencil for each one of the elements. It takes me a long time to make these, but I did residencies at Texas State, but since Xavier's here, I'm going to speed up. And this was really fun because I went to Texas State University where, has anybody ever been in Texas? People are big there, right? Generally. I mean, they are tall and they're tough. But it was great because I went there. Hey, how are you? And I went there and I had students that would do the printing for me. So I would paint on the plates and then they'd process it through the press. And we were able to make hundreds, and I started losing control because so much was going on at the same time, and I wasn't sleeping. And after every print session, we'd go have beers after. And so it was totally out of control, and it was some of the most interesting work because I had lost control of the process. I remember once I went home to sleep, and I tried to sleep, and I thought the students are working, and I'm not. So I got to go back there. So I went back, I was like, hey, sorry guys, I was just really tired, but I figured I was wimping out, and one of them goes, yep, that's what I thought. So I was like, thanks. But let's skip this. And this was my self-portrait. That's what I felt like. But because ultimately that's, I think, all we are. It's just we're intuitive, and we move around. I'll do one more thing. Usually when I do this talk, I read these, but we don't have time. There's a wonderful poet from Miami called Richard Blanco. Has anybody ever heard of him? He's Cuban, but born in Madrid. And so he does a lot of this cultural identity stuff, not knowing what his identity is. And so we worked together because although he's Cuban and American, and I'm French and American, we had this commonality of not knowing where we belong and where we were going and things. And so we did this series together about the ambiguity of place, a sense of place. Where are we from? And this was really kind of relevant to Miami. And so this one, you can see some of this poem in there. So what I would do is I'd take his poem and I'd actually draw the poem, like looking at the letters as shapes. And I'd put them in there, and then I'd cover them up. And then there's a map of Paris underneath, but over it is obviously Cuba. So that these Paris and Cuba come together to create a new place, which is an identity that exists in our minds. And this one, I don't really care about who buys them usually, because it's just money, right? Like you get rid of it, because actually, usually, I'm one of the artists, I'm not attached to my work at all. I like to get rid of all of it. Because if it stays around, I just destroy it. I keep working on it. But this one, I was really happy because the Miami-Dade County Public Library bought it. And that was special to me that people in Miami would see it as similar, like it would speak to them about what our identity is a little. And there's Richard. He's very handsome, which is terrible to work with because whenever we go do a talk, everybody would go and ask him questions. And here's some more of the work, but I'm going to go through this. And these are the last paintings I have in here. And so I read a lot, and I think you guys should all read a lot because it's one of the great pleasures in life. And right now you're in college, and you're paying to be able to read. And then the greatest thing about the Honors College is the people on either side of you. Because you get to be in classes with other intelligent, motivated people. And as you realize, you don't realize it now, but when you're out of school, because you guys have been in school for a long time, right? You started when you were what, 5, 6? And you haven't stopped. What are you guys now, like 22, 23? So you've been in school for 18 years. And what you're not going to realize is when you get out of school, that ability to interact in a group about ideas and stuff, it just vanishes. All of a sudden you're going to work somewhere and people don't talk about the same ideas. They talk about what a jerk the boss is, or I can't believe I have to work an extra hour today. And so this community, this intellectual community you have is going to disappear, so you should take advantage of it. But I was very interested, I'm very interested in ideas, and I like to talk a lot, and I like to read. But you're in a precious time of your life, really take advantage of it, because it will not be there forever. And I was very interested, and I was teaching an honors class with scientists, and scientists are so strange because they believe in truth and that it's attainable and things, and they do tests to verify truth. And artists like truth is irrelevant, it's just like the more subjective and crazy you are, like Picasso, Van Gogh, the better artist you are. Truth is what? Who cares about that? But he gave me this book that was about the beak of the finch, and it's about these finches in the Galapagos Islands. And he was saying that if you look, and this was interesting because it was about perception, that if you look at a bush and you see a lot of finches flying around it quickly, we think like, oh nice, they're all flying and dancing together, what a lovely little thing. But the scientist is saying that it's a competition between all the finches to get the limited resource, food, first. So it's actually a war between the finches. But we look at it, and I would look at it and think, look how cute, that's so adorable. I wish I could just grab them and pet them and things like that. But it's a life struggle. And so I try to make paintings that have that similar strange thing about them. And it's impossible to see in slides. Remember, you're not seeing paintings. You're looking at bad photographs and then a bad projection that's small. This is much larger. But so here's a map of Europe, and you see Spain, France, Great Britain, tip of Africa here. The Italian boot kicking Sicily, Greece. And then if you look closely, and I think there's a slide here, you see all those lines on there? Well, those lines are all over here. And what it is I took an atlas of World War II that showed every single battle in Europe. And I basically mapped all of those battles onto one painting, one map. And so that when you look at it, it's supposed to look like an abstract, pleasing painting. It's the primary colors. You have red, blue, and yellow. But actually what it is it's war. It's one of the worst wars ever. And it's supposed to be from day 1 to day 2. So you can see those lines, they're everywhere. It took me months to do this. I don't know why I do these kinds of things. But you can see here whoops. So the red are the allies, the green are the Axis. Let's see if I can go on. These are other things. And I think this is the last one I have. Is it? Can't see. Anyways, I was doing this painting about explorers. So this is a map of the world. So Antarctica's down here. There's Australia, Africa, Asia, Europe, Greenland, and North America, South America. And then there are all these lines everywhere that are about explorers. So it's about discovering this world. And I want to make a painting about discovering the world. But I worked on it for 2 years, and I hated it. And you know what it is to work on a painting for 2 years, and the more you work on it, the worse it gets. And you have in your mind, a year ago, this thing looked pretty close to finish and looked better than it does now. What am I doing? And so I was looking through these books, and I found this diagram of what uranium does in an atom bomb explosion. And I said, I'm just going to destroy the world. And so I took these U's, and I charted them exactly how a uranium atom splits, and I blew up my world. And I don't know, now this painting got finished with that after I destroyed it. There you can see the explorer lines and all that. So, this was a show. These are the last things I have. So this is a show in the Jacksonville Museum of Art. And so you can see the paintings in there. And one of the things I tell you guys is that painting ended up being one that I've liked the most, and it's been pretty successfully received. But it was only after I destroyed everything that I thought was the best part of it, right? So that when I paint, I'm not doing painting by numbers. It's a constant dialogue of trying to solve something. And when you're in a jam, like intellectual or life or whatever, sometimes you just need to reconsider everything. And whenever you get to a point where you're not willing to reconsider everything, then you're stuck. You stop living, right? So think about that, and that's what drives me, is that I have this incredible freedom in my paintings to do whatever the hell I want. And if I ever get to a point where I'm not doing that anymore, then it's not worth painting for me. And I also would like to think that my life is the same way, that once I stop being able to do what I want to do, which happens to many of us at different times, I've stopped living. Anyways, that's my 2 cents, so there you go. Oh, and that's my son. In the studio. He likes painting. While they're setting up, you know, when Sandy was coming through here and we still had some bad weather and things, he's 12. That's a picture a while ago. And we're riding on our bikes and he goes, Dad, are hurricanes really bad? I go, yeah, they can destroy things. And he's like, are you sure? Because I'd like it if it came. Because they was just thinking about getting out of school, which is the only thing that matters to them. And I go, could you imagine it came and kills people and things like that? What if all of this was destroyed? And he goes, I just hope I don't die a virgin. I almost wiped out on my bicycle. I'm like, what? You know, yeah, the world is a different place. Andro, he's 12, and we were talking about a hurricane coming and destroying a city, and he said, I just don't want to die a virgin. How are you?
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be quick either.
All right. You said your paintings are just like a whole bunch of random juxtaposition, right? How would you know, like, from looking in an encyclopedia, what to take out of it? Did you just like flip to a random page? Okay, I'll take that.
Well, that's a great question, and I realized that so that it evolved. At first, I'd flip through and I go, oh, that's a cool picture, I'll use that. But then I realized, well, I'm just picking pictures still. So I started doing the boom, just opening it to that page. But then somebody said, yeah, but you're still doing it that way. And so I was trying to remove myself as much as possible. And then I started just picking numbers. And so whatever was on that page, I would use. But then I'm still picking the numbers. So then I try to get other people to pick numbers. But still, no matter what, I was involved. So the project was fun to do, but I was still the one somehow making the decision. So it was impossible. It was a constant contradiction. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't need to prove a theory in art. You just need to explore stuff.
I have a question. If we have time. Do we have time, or? Of course. Okay, great. Well, do you think there would ever be a science worth pursuing that would have more of an artsy philosophy to it? One that sort of lends credence to scientific truths, but looks at it more in a, I don't know, like less of a warfare-like way.
For science?
Yeah.
Well, I think...
Because right now it's run by a materialistic philosophy, you know?
Right, but science, it's very interesting because there's a drive by many scientists, or a lot of books written there, almost always by scientists, that show these relationships between art and science. And certainly, you might be able to apply some science to art, but there's this fundamental problem that's a difference in approach, which is that science, as I understand it, is based on objectivity. So that if you do something in your lab over here, her in China around the world has to be able to replicate it, and that's how you get to a theory. In art, the greatest artists are the ones that no one can replicate. So that Van Gogh is the only one that paints with the crazy colors and the texture at the time. And so it's the strength of science is objectivity, the strength in art is subjectivity. And I don't see any way to reconcile that without destroying one or the other. So, I don't know.
Okay. Cool. Hey,
But I like science. I like everything. I just don't believe in much, you know? Yeah. But your question also about it being a contradiction. In art, contradictions are what drive things, and you don't have to resolve them. You don't need to be right. The most important thing in art is kind of asking the question, like, the science one, that's a great one to develop a body of work. And you don't need to come up with an answer with the truth. You just need to have something that stimulates you and stimulates thought in your audience. That's all that matters. You don't ever resolve stuff, I don't think. If you did, it'd be over. For art.
Okay, I want to introduce you to Professor Xavier Cortada, and they both received the questions that I sent to you all about what they wanted to present and how they want to present, so I'm going to let you talk about your vision.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a little bit sort of presumptuous to come in and talk to you about the treasures of South Florida and talk about my art. I think that's kind of bizarre. It's like, hi, I'm a treasure. Isn't that weird?
Both are.
Isn't that weird? Thank you. But I do think that art does provide us with treasure. And the biggest treasure that I'm going to share with you is an art piece I did when you were in elementary school in 2001. Like what grades were we in? Right? Just think about that. And the treasure that I'm going to share with you is the voice. The voice of one person in Miami at a particular point in time, responding to a bunch of world events that were affecting me as a kid living in Miami when I was in 4th grade, and as a kid living in Miami when I was in high school, and as a kid living in Miami throughout college at U of M, and then as an adult when I was responding to this piece. Has anyone ever heard those words? No tengan miedo. Does anyone know what that?
Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. I mean, that's a biblical verse, but in the context of Miami or Cuba, does that ring a bell with anybody? I know you were in 4th grade, but... So the Pope John Paul II, went to Cuba back in that time period, 2008. And he did so at a time when the world was still a little turbulent, right? Not 2008, 1998. The Berlin Wall had fallen about a decade earlier in '89. The 9/11 hadn't happened yet. We're in a different sort of place in time. Elian was about to happen a few years later. Does anyone know Elian? Does the word Elian mean something to this room?
Yes.
What's Elian?
The kid, right? The kid who came here and his father.
Go ahead,
It's
you
like
go.
there's a whole like battle with him. He stays here, he goes back.
It was a tough time in Miami. There was a 6-year-old boy who left Cuba in 2001 on a raft with his mom. And a lot of the people perished. He made it. All sorts of tale and lore about the dolphins rescuing him and bringing him to shore. I mean, dolphins do that. Dolphins hang out with people. Yeah, it did happen. But like it took on really almost mythical proportions because the life of so many people in Miami and their experiences leaving a brutal regime and starting a new life and being sort of torn away, being orphans, if you will, like this kid was, that lost his dad, was all encapsulated in this one child. Okay, so that was 2001. 3 years prior to that, another big moment happened. We thought that Cuba was going to be free, that the state that had kicked out the Catholic Church, that had jailed dissidents, that had no free expression, that had completely gotten rid of all sorts of liberties, was now opening up, right? You had the Berlin Wall fall in '89, we had this thing called the Special Period in '94, people thought there was a little opening, maybe Cuba was going to be like the Eastern Bloc, we'd have a little freedom in Cuba. And this one guy with a robe, representing, one of the largest religious groups on the planet, was going to come to Cuba and open that up. And when he got there, he said these words, "Have no fear." He talked about that. So I'm going to take you through a little journey how an artist who grew up in Cuban Miami, feeling Cuban, feeling American, feeling both, kind of like what you talked about, and feeling like neither Cuban or Cuban or Cuban American or American. Right? Being caught in that sort of hyphen, that weird place, and creating art that responded to that. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. And the treasure, I can promise you, is not the art, not to diss the art, I love it, but the treasure, I think, is the voice. And what what motivated me to create the art. And hopefully along the way we'll have some discussions, because you're going to see me go from being a painter to being influenced by my trip to Cuba, where people didn't have things, so they had to resolver, they had to make with what they had. So I used found objects instead of paint to create art. And then I went and layered it with some conceptual, some ideas behind it. So what I'm going to take you is on a journey that's as old as 4th grade for you, right? And I could sit here and talk to you about my present day stuff, but I thought it'd be a little bit more important to sort of show you what I believe is a little more of a treasure, because it's got a little bit more distance, right? It's got a filter of time to look at it. And it's a very unique thing. I think it'd be a treasure because for those of you who didn't experience it, or were too young, or maybe are from another community and are just getting here, this thing called art gives you a glimpse to one person's perspective about a moment in history. And I think that's what the treasure of an artist is, to be able to capture and convey that idea. Okay? So let's go with No Tenga Miedo. I guess we'll turn the lights off and see a slideshow. All right, so this is my piece back in 1999 of the Pope. I had just visited Cuba to see the Pope. And in this case, I don't know the crowd I'm speaking to. I'm assuming there's a handful of you here are probably Cuban American. Most of you are not. So there's this patron saint of Cuba called Our Lady of Charity, and she's usually depicted as having 3 Juanes, or 3 fishermen who found a little statue 400 years ago on the ocean on the eastern coast of Cuba. So I sort of did the same thing, and over here you have these 3 individuals with different expressions sort of looking up to this Pope, almost as if he was this new deity, this new savior. The same with these 3 fishermen picked up what was a colonial image of a Virgin Mary in the rough seas of Cuba. And legend has it, as soon as they put this little statue on their little rowboat, the seas calmed. Here you have an entire population, goes from one side of the island, goes on the other, across time, looking to this figure with that same sort of magical, sort of like, is there the magic? Is there the something that's going to end this torment or this tempest of Cuba? And I guess I'm going to state the obvious. Cuba is a regime where there has not been an election since Eisenhower. Cuba is a regime where there really hasn't been any freedom, really. I mean, it had a constitution in 1940, but it's an island that was a colonial state from Spain until the Spanish-American War, and has been completely mismanaged politically since time immemorial. It is just a failed state. It's got a bunch of art that's really powerful and beautiful, and I think that's because it's been such a pained place that it creates beautiful art. It's got a tropical paradise, it's got a great PR, but it's politically a total. And there is an entire community here that built itself in an exile, trying to flee the latest iteration of that, and that is the Castro regime. That's a regime that has been alive longer than I have, and it's been around since 1959. So I'm sure most of you know what Cuba is, but I'm responding as the son of Cuban exiles who got here in '62 to the story of Cuba. So I created this piece, which happened the year after this piece. This piece is called Communion in the Plaza. And in 1998, the Catholic Church allowed people to sort of come and see the Pope's Mass in Cuba. And this Mass happened in a place called the Plaza of the Revolution, which is smack in the middle of Havana. And I boarded a plane from Miami International Airport with a bunch of bishops, and they were all there wearing their garb, and I showed up on an 8-hour trip. I was wearing my University of Miami polo, and I was there to hear the Pope's Mass and have communion in Havana. I was going to get right back on that plane and come to Miami. I had never been to Cuba. As a child, I had listened to my grandmother talk all about Cuba. Through the years, as a high school student at Miami High, I witnessed the Mariel boat lift and kids from Cuba sort of come into my high school, monolinguistic, and sort of work their way. Growing up in Little Havana, I have seen different wave after wave of immigrant group of fellow Cubans come to Miami. This was the first time that I got to experience the home. It was the first time that I got to see Cuba, and I gave gave myself permission to go there because the Pope was going to go there. Just like the painting before, I needed a reason to go. Again, look at time. Today, you can just go to Cuba. It's not as big of a deal. Put yourself in 1998, it was the common thing to go to Cuba. Okay? So this piece has me in the plaza. Right behind me is Che Guevara. Che Guevara, a icon, right? The guy has to be turned in his grave because, first of all, he's a murderer, right? He's a guy who literally ran that building where his face is. That's the building called the Ministry of the Interior. It's the guy who helped run all the kangaroo courts that had mass executions of innocent people. So that's who Che is. But Time Magazine and a bunch of T-shirts have made him a commercial icon. And it's just so, to me, incongruous. But here I am at the plaza. Over there I have Che. Across the plaza is a picture of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. At the center you have the Pope in his Mass. And to the side you have Jose Marti. And I'm looking at all these icons, right? Some sacred, some blasphemous, some murderers. And I'm trying to reconcile what's going on. But the same thing's happening right at the center of the plaza. You have me trying to get communion. But I am in Cuba, and the only way I can get a communion is if I have a little sticker that says I'm allowed to get communion, right? It is, after all, a socialist state. So there's this stupid struggle between me, who's in dream, this nun who's giving communion, the guy from state security who's not letting me get there, and the people wearing the yellow hats who are at the church trying to let me get communion. And in the middle of it all, there's these guys who are dissidents with this blue bed sheet with the words Viva Cristo Rey, which if you just read them, it says, Long live Christ the King. Sounds pretty innocuous. But those were the words uttered by people right before they were going to be executed by the guy on the face of that building in the plaza. So I'm sitting here in 1998, and this is surreal, right? I've got a pope who let me in, I've got dissidents speaking, and they're not getting arrested, and I'm having communion in a place where religion has been made illegal. Looks like we've got an opening here, right? Looks like, we're finally going to be free. This is 98. You were in 4th grade, right? I had a bunch of work that I was doing at that point in time, including a piece called the Varela painting. And if you just put yourself in 1998, these were huge, huge moments in Miami, right? Miami was thinking, oh my God, finally, after 40 years, there's going to be some freedom in Cuba. And I was painting a painting about this guy named Varela, which is not just a high school here. It's the guy, a Spaniard, who allowed us to think as Cubans. So here's someone I learned about, because when I was a kid, I would see the mural at Our Lady of Charity Church here in Miami, a real treasure in Miami. It's this shrine next to Mercy Hospital, talking to Mercy Hospital on Vizcaya, which was literally built. I was there as it was built. We were in a little shed next door, and little by little people built this shrine. And every day I would hear Father Roman tell us about the tragedy of political prisoners, about the history of Cuba. So I got my lessons about who Cubans were and what the Cuban history was, literally by going to this church. And at the very top of a mural that a guy named Theo Carrasco painted while I was in 4th grade at that church is this guy. And he's sort of Father Felix Varela, who also lived in St. Augustine, who also dealt with a lot of immigrant families, particularly Irish in New York City. A writer, a thinker, the first Cuban, basically. The first person who taught us to think not as a Spanish colony, but as a Cuban colony. And that is the building called La Ermita with all the icons and symbols. I know in this class you're looking at that. Well, here the bishop's chair is made out of a palm tree from Cuba. Under the altar, there was this pyramid made with sand from each of the 6 provinces in Cuba. It was chock full of symbolism on this place. So here I am as a young artist, sort of referencing all these images that connected me to my island. Right? Then, I wanted to get the message out after I visited the island, because I thought that too many people had a big disconnect between what the Pope came there to do and what was happening in Cuba. And again, this is a religious series. I'm talking about the Pope. So I decided to do something called the Stations of the Cross. And I decided to depict sort of the Passion of Christ and the different steps of the Stations of the Cross. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Of you that may be Catholic in the room, there's 14 stations, everything. It's basically Jesus getting crucified, and it's every step of the way. That's been depicted by artists through time. If you go to any church that's Catholic, you'll see the little sculptures in the wall. And it's a ritual that you do to sort of relive the Passion of Christ. Right? So what I did is I created the Cuban Stations of the Cross, and I had the tragedy of the Cuban Revolution reveal itself as if they were stations. So instead of Christ being crucified, I'm having that guy being executed. And like that, I did that over and over again, sort of to bring a religious perspective to a political tragedy. Well, then I went back to Cuba in 2001. And I went there literally as Elian was being fought over here. Elian was here, I was in Cuba. And I hung out with my cousins. And I wasn't in a church bus with a bunch of bishops dressed in, their robes anymore. And I was living in their house. And I was getting arrested in a fishing village. And I was eating what I'm sure was not cow. And the food in the refrigerator was lukewarm. And I saw poverty and tragedy, and I went to see my dying great-grandfather at a hospital. I didn't want to touch the walls. And then I hung out with my cousin, and anything and everything he wanted to do, it's not like you go to Home Depot and buy something. We had to sort of make it from nothing. So I'm still as passionate, but now all of a sudden, I'm trying to respond to an experience. That's not just an 8-hour surreal trip listening to Mass in a crowded plaza, but it's sort of living the reality of Cuba with my cousin in his house. And that prompted me to create a series of pieces for an exhibit I had 3 years after the Pope visited Cuba, trying to capture his trip and what that trip meant. And we were still hopeful, but it had been 3 years and not a lot of change had happened. And the reason I brought this slideshow to you, I could have shown you any of the work I do. A lot of it actually is based on science. A lot of it has to do with the environment. A lot of it has to do with my installations and different kind of work I do. But this is a pivotal and important piece because it was a precursor to all that. In other words, each of you are finding your ways as students and as either future artists or scientists or leaders in this community. And I just think that in art, there's this thread that each of us have as artists. And you're going to see here, I'll reference some of the other work I do, but over here you see this as an important series of works for me because it broke me from strictly being a painter, if it wasn't on canvas, it wasn't art, to something that was a little bit different or more dramatic. So I decided to create this piece made with the same found objects. I would take a lot of walks on Biscayne Bay, and I just started creating these pieces. And this thing here reminded me of the paranoia you felt when you were in Cuba. I went from that fishing village in the northern coast of Cuba all the way to Havana. And there was this kind old man in the front, the bus that I took. And he waved at me walking in. And then I went to another cousin's house all the way at the other end of the island. And as I leave the front door of the other cousin's house, in a place nowhere near the bus station, that same old man is there waving, saying hi to me. Clearly I was being followed. There's a state security. I'm an American, I'm pretty vocal. And they've got someone with eyes behind me. Ask anyone who's lived in a Soviet state. That's not so unusual. And people on the island say that everyone has Fidel Castro in their head. Everyone has a communist tyrant in their head. So here I try to use blades and images like that to depict the fear that people lived in Cuba, and that's called Fearscape. The next piece I created was Article 13. And Article 13 had a bunch of keys. A bunch of keys I had, I'm sure each of you have lots of keys that you don't ever use and they're stuck in a drawer. So I emptied that drawer, and got a bunch of keys, and put them at the center of this piece. And in the top, there's a medio punto, which is reminiscent of a lot of the colonial houses in Cuba, right? This window that's semicircular. And I was trying to, and there's a doorknob at the side. And what Article 13 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights says that all of us have the right to a home, right? So over here, instead of painting about it, I was creating this piece, this assemblage that was about going home and about having that key and about the Pope through this exhibit that I was creating, telling people don't be afraid of taking that key and opening your destiny, opening But sort of the third piece in this little triptych is called Alumbrón. And in the background, you can see an image of the Pope, basically. So each of these have a little canvas, but surrounded by this are garbage bags and a lot of electrical sockets and things like that. But it also has a light, and it's called Alumbrón, which is, of course, a play on the word apagón. And in Cuba, there's nothing but an apagón, which means the lights are always out. The system is so bad, the economy is so horrible, there's not enough fuel that literally blackouts or rolling blackouts in the city all the time. So here I am saying that you have a fearscape, you have a house, right? You're afraid, there's a house, and there's a little light coming through telling you, go ahead, come on in. The days of the blackouts are over, have no fear, come to Cuba. So that triptych, where those three sort of pieces came together to create that idea. Using the idea of power, I wanted to reference the fact that Cuba is this island that is self-referential because it's closed off from the rest of the world. So I took an electrical circuit and just connected it to itself. So it has no power. There's nothing fresh coming to it. It's sort of a closed circuit, right? Can you visualize that? It's plugged into itself. And in it, and I quote Fidel Castro, who says, "We are the only ones here and there are no others." Right? That's a good way for a tyrant or someone who literally is not letting its freedom of expression come out. It's not letting anyone inside. It blames the embargo, and I have another piece about that one, for all its problems. But the actual intolerance is coming from within. The homophobia is coming from within. The racism for an island that supposedly was fighting against racism is coming from within. The lack of freedom of political expression or of journalism is coming from within. Because all that matters is what revolves around Fidel. A closed circuit. It's got no power, it's got no light, it's got no light. This piece is called El Semillero, or the person who posts seeds. And over here, time and time again, I wrote the word libertad. And over here, I wrote the word embargo. So the Pope goes to Cuba, and like me, he's against the embargo. Right? He thinks that the American embargo is not a good thing. And he says that once, I think maybe on an airplane or something, and headlines all over the planet are, the Pope's against the embargo. Right? The Pope also said the word liberty, as in give these people liberty, 59 times. Right? And those were the seeds he was trying to sow. That's what he was trying to do in Cuba. So I got a bunch of black beans and stuff from my kitchen, and even an old faucet. Again, I'm following my cousin's lead, right? I'm not buying anything new. I'm sort of creating something from Viendo, right? Like I'm following the practice of the people who are struggling in the island. And I create this gardening story, if you will, about how he came there to plant those seeds of change, how Pope John Paul II came in and tried to grow a free Cuba. And the reason I needed to create this piece is because too often people who dismiss the tragedy of Cuba say, well, it's the U.S.'s fault because they have this embargo. They call it a blockade. Well, Cuba is and has been free to trade with every other country on the planet. And that's not the issue. I kind of want the embargo to end so that the PR tool doesn't exist, so that you can continue a dialogue about what he said 59 times and not get stuck on the politics of what he said once. And this piece here, when I created it, I thought it was a little cynical on my part. Because, I mean, you look at it, it's pretty obvious religion's a trap, right? I mean, that's sort of what it looks like, a bunch of mouse traps in the form of a crucifix. I kind of feel that way now. You probably think you're talking to a very Catholic person. I've actually divorced myself from that faith. You know, I can still talk about it, but I'm no longer a church-going guy at all. In fact, I'm not a Catholic. But what I was talking about here wasn't about religion being a trap. It was about whether or not, and there's another piece that addresses this, is whether or not Fidel was creating a trap. That happens a lot with painters in Cuba, where you think that there's freedom of expression because an artist can get to opine about how bad Castro is in the close sort of art fair or biennial that's happening. So the world community comes in and says, oh, this place is free. Look, their artists are talking crap about Castro. that's all controlled because of the earlier slide, right? The broader community doesn't have the opportunity upon that, right? It's sort of aimed outward. So I thought that maybe the Pope was falling into the same trap. That the Pope was coming in to sort of say, see, Castro isn't so bad if the Pope and President Castro are going to be on the same stage, and the guy can greet them at the airport. Maybe we need to give Fidel Castro a second chance, is what the world community is saying. And in the geopolitical place, that's not such a surreal argument. There's so many people who so despise what America stands for, or the way America has historically behaved, that anyone who's an enemy of America must be a good guy. Anyone who stands up to America must be a good guy, which is why at the United Nations you see a lot of lopsided votes every now and then. So I sort of thought that maybe by the priest or the Pope going to Cuba, that was going to happen. I thought it was cynical when I created it, because I never thought that really I'd be stuck here in 2012 and Cuba is still under dictatorial rule. So what I thought was the most cynical piece actually is probably the one that came to fruition, right? It's probably the one that's closest. At the end of the day, John Paul II is long dead, and Castro's sort of half dead, but he's still there. You'll see another piece I did about him too. This one here is called the Information Bouquet, and even today there's some artists who can blog out of Cuba, and it's so hard for me to give you this exhibit in the context of 2012 Miami, right? Because so much, the world has changed so much since 1998 and 2001. I mean, it has changed dramatically, you know. Everything, I mean, Facebook didn't exist, you know what I mean? Like, it's a different world, right? So back then, the idea of calling Cuba or connecting with Cuba was an ordeal, right? The idea of communicating, right, was an ordeal. So this information bouquet was the gift I wanted to give Cuba. Instead of giving you a bunch of flowers, I want to give you a bunch of, you know, tools to be able to have open expression so that you could understand the truth, so you wouldn't be manipulated by your government, so that you would know what was happening. So that's what that piece represents. This one here talks a lot about faith. So there's a whole body here, and we'll get into it in a second, where they're all pretty ambiguous, but it talks about faith, it talks about the syncretic religion of Cuba, it talks about what powers you, what drives you every day in a place where you're being basically silenced or kicked, or you're being pawned around, so that your entire life purpose is how you're going to get food, right? Like, I have this little notebook, it tells me I can get 2 loaves of bread, and if I go to this store, I get that there. But then I go to the black market here, and that's how I'm going to get a little piece of meat. But then I have no fridge to put it in, so, you know, so your entire preoccupation with life is not about being creative, it's not about doing anything other than how the hell do I get out of this island, or how do I eat? I mean, that's what it can get broken down to. And when something is so oppressive, faith is what gets you through. So faith in Cuba isn't as simple as a pope in a robe wearing a cross. Faith in Cuba has had all sorts of iterations, but within the Christian faith, there's a syncretism, right? The faith that the slaves had when they came to Cuba, and the faith that was imposed on them by their Spanish Catholic owners. And that syncretic faith that came across still lives today and is probably as powerful as anything else. So in this piece, and you'll see it over and over again, where I reference saints and I reference people who would be normally thought about as Catholic, you know, saints, but they're really Santeria or gods of other faiths. But there's a syncretic way of approaching them. And depending on which saint you pray to, you get a different outcome. And that's kind of what you'll see in a series of these pieces. So over here, the thing that, and you see me talk about power a lot, right? You see the fuses, you see the balloon, you see the umbrella, and now you see the faith fuse box. So the juice, if you will, that's going to keep you going through all this, in this case is these candles, these sort of candles that you pray to your saints to. This other piece here is called, in Cuba, there are no venomous snakes, or there are no poisonous snakes, I guess is the translation. And it's true, actually, you know, for whatever reason, you know, the evolution of this island did not create a species of snakes that were poisonous. And I just took, again, this powerful little, like a little cord thing, and I coiled it as if it was a snake. And to me, the idea that Cuba doesn't have a poisonous snake is irrelevant, because so many other things can bite and kill you, right? The idea that you look at one item like Cuba has the best healthcare system. The hell with the fact that we kill everything else, that we destroy people, but at least we have a good healthcare system, right? It's like a piece of propaganda that to me falls flat. The same way as saying, oh, don't worry about everything, we have no poisonous snakes here. Everything else can affect you. So that's what this piece represents, sort of making commentary about how just simplifying something to that end is a hollow argument, which is why I ended by saying, so what? And at the end, you kind of find out the snake is poisonous, that way I did with my great-grandfather. The people who get good hospital care are the people who find and afford it. The same way when I was having dinner with my dad at a restaurant in Havana, I could go because I had dollars, but my cousin couldn't because he lived in an apartheid state, and the Cubans couldn't go there. That's changed a bit since, but not when I went there in 2001. This is absolutely my favorite piece in the whole thing, and it's called Revolution. So I took a toilet plunger, right, and I put wheels on it, because to me, the revolution is nothing but that it just spreads the shit. It doesn't take it out, it doesn't unclog it, it just takes the shit and spatters it all over the place and makes it worse. And there's all this lofty stuff, from the Che Guevara shirts to Castro's, 8-hour speeches on the plaza, that could tell you, right, oh my God, the change, and they got rid of the mob, and now we have a class, and to me, it has been the same stuck toilet, full of shit, unable to get rid of the feces of political hell in Cuba. So this piece here is called Revolucion, and it's basically a toilet plunger that doesn't go like this and finally clean it out, it just spreads it over. So that's called Revolution. And it can't even stand straight. I mean, it's in a 4 legs. It's got sort of like 3, but they're hardly standing together, but they're still there, like a stool. I mean, it's better than not. Here I go back to the same idea of thinking about or praying to your saints, and it's instead of a leap of faith, it's a leap of faith. And in many cases, your success can depend on what saint you pray to. It also can depend on how lucky you are to get across the straits, how lucky you are to finally come to the United States, how lucky you are to have a family member that can get you out, right? So in many ways, the reality of Cuba also has to do with how lucky you are to succeed in the black market, how lucky you are to, game it, right? To game the system. So in many cases, it's not like if I do good and I do what I'm supposed to do, then I'm going to succeed and make it here, right? So that idea of having a path that's predictable, that makes any society, it makes the stock market happen, right? Like if you have some sense of predictability, then the stock market rises. If you have instability, then it's chaos. So the same thing in society. You kind of know that in the morning, your police officer is going to follow the law, and if you break it, there's a justice system and there's a rule of law, then things are okay. But if you live in another place that's more chaotic, then it's sort of who you know, and it depends who and how I can bribe this person, or it depends on what external force that I have no control over gets me through. And sometimes it's luck, and sometimes it's fate, and you've got 2 card players here trying to figure out how they're going to win. Here's Fidel Castro. Again, I had no clue back in 2000 how funny and predictive this piece would be. So you have a bunch of butterflies right at the bottom, and to me, I think of all these people. I buried my grandmother last year. My partner, his father, 5 years before. And every time we bury one of these people who thought they left with a couple of suitcases in the 60s for a few months or years to go back home and sort of be back in their home, it's another powerful, loss. It's like, my God, not only have you lost your nation, but now you've lost it all. You literally don't get to be buried in your birthplace. lost it all. Right? So every time I see another exile, another elderly person be buried by his grandchildren here, I hurt. And then on top, I have this tarantula, which, you know, I mean, I kind of love predators. I think they're really important for the ecosystem, but I'm not talking about that here. I'm just using the tarantula as what it's supposed to be, sort of like a symbol of something evil that's going to bite you and hurt you. And that's, of course, represents Fidel Castro, who's on top. The weird thing is that he still hasn't died, right? Like, we're sitting here today, right? And this guy's kind of like that tarantula. He's sort of half dead. Every now and then they prop him out. He's still on top. You can't kill this thing, right? So this piece is called "The Bad Bug Never Dies," right? And there he is, on top of all the cannons, on top of all the hot shot. You fumigate, you kill all the butterflies. They're upside down and dying, but the tarantula is always on top. Even when he's like on formaldehyde, which is what I think Fidel Castro is right now, he still rules that out. And to me, it's such a sad indictment on what's happening with Cuba. And this piece here talks a bit about that. I talk about how through the years, Castro's been the only elected leader in Cuba since Eisenhower. People have not been able to democratically, you know who Eisenhower was, right? Think about that. That's private. In fact, let's do it. It's a cute exercise. So it's JFK, and then there's Johnson, right? And then there's Nixon, and then there's Ford, and then there's Carter, right? A bunch of these have 2 terms, remember that, right? And we got Reagan with 2, and then we've got George George Sr., HW, and then you've got Clinton for 2, and then you got George W. for 2, and you've got Obama for 1, and maybe sooner. We'll see what happens tomorrow. But look at that. That's 10 U.S. presidents, a bunch of elections, and we still have the same dictator in power in Cuba controlling everything. So that's why I have dinosaurs and rulers. It's like, this is endless. You know, this is a never ending, and it's basically saying keeping watch over the wake. Right? I'm sitting here, you know, and the dinosaurs will come back, and I'm still sitting here as time passes, and it's immeasurable, right? And the majority of the people living in Cuba only know that. I mean, the majority of people living in Cuba, anyone who was born after 1959, know nothing but that as what a government is or does. And to me, it's just a sad state of affairs, and that's what that piece was about. So you have these candles, you have a picture of the Pope and Castro sitting there together. I have, sort of the symbols of their powers, but I also have these antiquated fights. This is before the movie Cowboys and Aliens came out, but, you know, I basically have a bunch of cowboys fighting this dinosaur. I have geopolitics of, a Cold War era fighting an island that's now irrelevant in the Cold War. I have an island that almost caused a missile crisis 50 years last month, literally being now ignored because geopolitically it's irrelevant, right? It just matters if you're wanting to win some Florida electoral votes. So all that you're looking at here is the irrelevancy of this geopolitical way of fighting and how time almost stands still. And all we're waiting for is for a new generation of leaders to come and finally flush that toilet. And like the other piece, this one was a little bit less cynical, but just as obvious about whether or not the Pope came there to clean off, to absolve, like any good priest does, forgive the sins of the tyrant, or if he was really going to get change. So I got a bunch of, for those of you that paint, there's always like extra paint laying around either on your, on your table or on your, help me out, Bailey, what's that called? I've been doing installations for a while, right? So I just tore them out and put them there. So the canvas is blank, the residue is out. So has a Pope come in and sort of scrubbed it with this thing straight out of my kitchen sink and sort of cleaned out the image of Cuba, or did he absolve the tyrant and allowed him to stay for what is now another 11 years in power? Similarly, there's that game. I created a little game with an old washing machine, and in it I colored and put different candles, these sort of saint candles that you pray to a saint. And each candle and each saint symbolized a different way or a different approach to bringing freedom to Cuba. And I think these depict in every way sort of depict the different approaches the Cuban exile community, the people on the island have to liberating Cuba. And I called it, what's your spin? Like when you spin something, you spin an idea politically to try to get some political points to spin. Well, I literally had a spin cycle. So the washer has a little map of Cuba, and in it says spin. And you can literally spin that, and depending on where your Cuba lands, it's your approach for freedom in Cuba, which is connected to one of these syncretic Afro-Cuban saints, which is also a little stamp, a little religious stamp about that saint. So over here, let me give you the spin on Cuba. Who are the different saints? If you want to die, you can be Saint Sebastian, right? Who was sort of killed with 1,000 arrows, and you would pray to Saint Sebastian. If you want to just rely on faith, you painted that virgin I told you about. Look, she's very sad. It's that virgin with the 3 fishermen who picked her up on the shore. You can decide that you're just going to declare, thermonuclear war. And you can be like St. George. Just go there and let the have people die, they die. Just fight for freedom. Let's do Bay of Pigs Redux. Part 2, let's just go and kick some ass and free this place once and for all. You can be a little bit more strategic. We didn't have drone missiles back then, but you could sort of, do what the CIA tried to do. Sort of, they would try to get cigars that would blow up in Castro's face, or pray to your favorite saint, and that saint will liberate Cuba. And that's what that piece was about. The other piece has to do with everyone waiting on the sidelines. And I created a dinner table, and that was some silver from my house. That's no longer there, obviously. And again, I got a bunch of maps and articles about Cuba and collaged them on the table. The place settings were all these knives, ready to feast, ready to eat. And what was for dinner? Cuba. And as every entrepreneur wanted to create a McDonald's in every store, every military general in Cuba who owns a piece of the pie, waiting for Castro to die so he can put all that stuff in a Swiss bank account. Every person who wants to go back and exploit the island and the poverty of the people that are there just to make a buck, as it always has been in Cuba. So the sadness of this piece is that, there's this anticipation. There's people literally betting on going in and taking the resources out of the island so they can devour it and eat it. And the island isn't sustainable. Again, I use power and cords again. Over here, it's like the other circuit. It's got 2 things. It can't even plug in together. It just doesn't work. It's just an island that after 60 years, or 50-some years of absolute decay and abandonment, can't even defend itself from it being devoured. And that's the sad state. I looked at Cuba in 2001, and I'm not any more optimistic today about that island and that piece. This is a piece I wrote called Looking for Cuba. And the reason I went to Cuba in 2001 is because a lot of my grandfather's brothers and sisters were dying. They're older, and they were dying. My grandfather was born in 1910. Some were both earlier, some later. And that's why I went to the hospital, to Danielle, and all these places, just to see my family before they died, because I refused to. The first time I went, I had to have the Pope give me permission to go, right? And that was really horrible. I didn't want to give a single dollar of mine, so I paid money to the church who chartered the plane. I didn't buy a single thing in Cuba. I didn't even tip the guy at the airport, because I didn't want a single penny of mine. Look how ridiculous this is, right? I was that, I'm not contributing to this island. I'm just here to pray and leave. That was me in 98. By the time I got to 2001, it was like, I'm not going to be manipulated by this. This is literally my flesh and blood. I want to see the village, the fishing village where my dad lived. I want to see where he grew up, and I want to see my dying family members. I also got to see communism firsthand. I got arrested because I was a passenger in a taxi. I mean, in a private car, not a taxi, and that was illegal. I got arrested because I was sleeping in my cousin's house and not in a state-owned house, right? So I got to see firsthand, sort of like this restrictive way of dealing with stuff. As I told you, I was in a bus and I got followed by state security just to make sure that I wasn't spreading bad propaganda like that preach guy, sort of telling people, hey, you can do something better than this, right? So I got to experience that, but I also kept a diary while I was there. And that's what this piece was. So one of the pieces I had there was called Looking for Cuba, and it was basically my way of trying to, in this chaos, find some semblance of that kid that wasn't Cuban, wasn't American, wasn't Cuban American, was actually none of the above. And part of what I've talked to you about in the last few minutes is how difficult that journey and that exploration was for me. So I took a piece in just the first page of my diary I wrote up, and in it was a conversation I had with my father on the plane, and he recounted his departure from Cuba as a kid, and how he left, and what his experiences and thoughts was going to happen, what his expectations were, and how all of that never materialized. In fact, I consider my dad and a lot of people from his generation to be the lost generation. People who, he was 21 when he got here, and he arrived here as a refugee. 3 of us were born in upstate New York, and he and my mom spent an entire life struggling, and they still have. They lost their country, they lost their innocence, their childhood. And I will bury my dad here, and Castro will probably still be, up in formaldehyde. So it's really a really, sort of sad state of affairs as to what's happened to an entire people. This piece is called The Diet of Worms, and in many ways it's sort of the same negotiation I had to make with myself, right? Where I said, you know what, I'm actually going to go, and yes, I literally will be spending money in Cuba, but I have to have this treaty with myself. I have to sort of do that. Well, over here at Miami International Airport during that time period to the day, people would literally pack huge bags of stuff just to take the people, everything from bras to cooking utensils, just because there was nothing there for people, right? So over here, this sort of play on words, right? This treaty. Gusanos is, by the way, Gusanos is what they call that bag. They call that bag gusano, which is a Spanish name for worm. But gusanos is also what Castro would call my dad and people who left Cuba. They said, you guys are worms, leave this out. You're not really Cubans, you're just worms or maggots. So get out of here. So this piece here is sort of my treaty with the maggots, basically saying that, well, not maggots, but worms. Like maggots and worms are 2 separate things, obviously. The worm is an earthworm, right? So you worms are crawling back here, but we're actually crawling back with all the goods that the government kicked us out. Can't provide for its own people. So that's what this piece does, and it's carrying that baggage, if you will. And this last piece, I think this is the last piece, I'm sure it sure is called Meat Map of Cuba. And you remember I told you about eating in my cousin's dining room table, and it was this little fridge they had. And honestly, I don't know what the refrigeration was, but that meat wasn't cold. It was kind of lukewarm. And I have no idea what that was ground in that meat. And I just didn't feel like the kind of stuff I wanted to eat. And I know that there were all these, during the 70s, all these cookbooks on how to make fake meat. And I'm not talking about like sort of vegetarian, veggie turkey burgers. I'm talking about how to sort of have enough protein to feed your family while you were in Cuba. Remember, everyone's about how are we going to make a living? How are we going to sort of survive or subsist? And I decided to take a piece and call it masa carnica, which is what these cookbooks would call this sort of fantasy meat that you would make to sort of feed your family. And at the same thing, I wanted to create something really raw, bleeding. And I took a bunch of meat I bought at the store, not too far from where this exhibit was, and I did a performance piece where I literally carved it up and served it to people. I mean, no one ate it, obviously, but I just put it in Cuba like a pulp of blood just sitting there, because the truth is that Cuba had no reason to, there's not a desert with no irrigation. Cuba had no reason to not be able to feed its people and to have a system where you could eat real meat or real food and have real governance and real families and a real working society. But instead it's been cut open and bled and carved to this point where it's just a pulp of red meat that you can't even eat because you're forced to eat the fake stuff. And that's what that piece was called. It's called Masacre. Oh, wait a minute, this may be the last piece. Oh, there's still others, I'm sorry. So this piece here, I mentioned McDonald's, speaking of meat, and of course when you think of McDonald's, you think of like American imperialism, right? You think of like franchise, you think of capitalism, you think of a bunch of other things, right? You think of fast food, you think about food, you think about a bunch of stuff, but more than anything else, you sort of think about corporate, dominion over a place. And I just created this piece here, which is of the flag of the Vatican, yellow and white, but I used McDonald's wrappers. So there's cheeseburgers on one side and hamburgers on the other. And it's the Vatican flag made of this imperialistic thing. And of course, I'm thinking about what the Vatican is and does. I mean, it's a state. It's not just a faith. It's a pretty damn powerful state in many ways. It drew the line that created, Brazil versus the rest of Spanish-speaking, right? Portuguese-speaking versus Spanish-speaking South America. I mean, we don't have to fake ourselves into understanding the power of this enterprise called the Catholic Church. So I thought, well, here in Havana, this flag is going to unfurl, and what will it bring? What comes with this new imperialistic? What comes with this new sort of entry into a communist totalitarian religionless state? And that's what that piece called Unfurl. What will get unfurled? This piece, actually, I didn't know it then, and it is this probably is the one piece I probably thought more to talk to you about. For a very long time, when I was a kid in 6th grade, I went to Catholic school, and I was an altar boy and all that stuff, which is probably why you see me create all this sort of Catholic-based work. And I was the guy who had to go up. It was a school in downtown Miami called Jason Catholic, and I was the guy charged with going up the stairs 5 flights every day with the American flag. And I would go and throw that flag, and all the 1st to 8th graders would do the Pledge of Allegiance and sing God Bless America. And for me, the idea of a flag is a very powerful symbol about power, about identity, about dominion, and it's about a bunch of things. Is that a fire alarm? Oh, it's my phone saying hello. But the flag also, so it's a symbol that I've used, sorry about that. It's a symbol that without knowing I've used over time. I thought about these Spanish conquistadors coming and putting their flag for Spain in a place that wasn't there. I thought about all these colonial powers. And since then I've used the symbol of a flag in a lot of my work. I was an artist with a residency in the South Pole, and I used the moving sheet at the South Pole as an instrument to mark time, and the flags were the way I did that. I did another installation at the North Pole about reforestation, again, using the flag. So to me, without knowing it, a decade earlier, the flag, this is the first flag I ever created out of this sort of emotion that I was feeling about a bit of ambiguity I was feeling about something that happened in Cuba, but it opened or heightened my awareness to use it as either another symbol or another vocabulary by tapping into something from my past, namely my elementary school days. And I'm pretty sure this is the last piece, and it connects a lot with a lot of the work I do. It's called Agua Bendita, Watery Graves. And what I was basically trying to do was find the interconnectedness of things. So when I would walk by Biscayne Bay to pick up all this junk to create the artwork, I would think the very water I was touching was clearly connected to the Gulf Stream and Cuba and all these places where people died trying to find freedom. So I wanted to create an homage to that, and we don't know the exact number, but over 70,000 people had died at that point trying to cross the Florida Straits. And I just wanted to create a piece that referenced that. And to me, the vessel wasn't as important. The important thing was the connectivity, the thing that connected both of these islands, the thing that grounded us. And in this case, it was water. It was the nature between the two. So that was No Te Da Miedo. Oh, God. I promise you this is the last one. I keep on forgetting. Right? So this is called, this piece is so self-referential. It's just about being executed. So I'm trying to frame things using what you're passionate about. So if you're a Catholic, but you don't care about the revolution, but I make the crucifixion look like an execution, then you realize, oh my God, the passion of Christ, the passion of this poor dissident who just got executed unjustly. Oh, okay, I see a connection. Well, what I tried so hard to do when I was creating these Cuba pieces was to try to let people understand my voice, right? This is where I think this art piece comes around. In a place where people maybe didn't have that understanding because they didn't care, or they just weren't sensitive to it, or it wasn't in their view. And even if you give it to them and show it to them, right, they may still not understand it, and that's what this piece is. So depending on your perspective, you may not even get the piece. So this piece is called Untitled, which many artists don't title their pieces. They just don't title them, and they're untitled. Other people titled their pieces Untitled, right? So that's literally a title. The title is Untitled. And there's a piece that is called Esto no tiene nombre, which translates to This has no name, or it could also translate to Untitled. But they're two completely different things, because Esto no tiene nombre is something you say about something that's so horrible that you can't name it. Like, this is so horrible, it has no name, no one's ever thought of something like this. Or it could be something as simple as Untitled. It could be as horrible as 76,000 people have died, or as, well, people die every day. Right? So to me, it's sort of like, even after you have all the facts, even after you have all the information, it's still about how you perceive things and what you bring to it. And every artist struggles with this because every piece we create is nothing more than a conversation. You may look at it as an object, but it has no life unless you're there. So all it is a conversation between an artist who may not be as message-driven as every one of these pieces were. It could be about an artist who's trying to innovate and create a new art form, and that's a message, that's a communication that they're having, art for art's sake. It could be didactic, it could be political, it could be all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, it's about conveying something to some audience. And it's that interaction between the audience and the artist that I think that makes art extremely powerful. We did that at these exhibits. That's how the pieces were installed. And all of these works have just been accepted at, my favorite place for them to go, which is at the Freedom Tower, which is where my dad and my mom were processed as refugees. That's now a museum. It's called the Museum of Art and Design, Miami-Dade College, and these are now all parts of the permanent collection, which makes me very happy, because when it started, it was a platform to have a conversation, as we did in 2001, about the issue of the day, about Elian, about Cuba, about the Pope. But I think as time moves on, there's more intelligent or more relevant or more contemporary ways of having that conversation. So you don't need these pieces. So these pieces may indeed become treasures, like something you find in the ground that you didn't know was there. But by opening up that box, you get to see how this particular conversation or these particular people were seeing this particular thing at a point in time. And that's why when I was invited to speak to you today, and the topic was treasure, I don't think that these are treasures in the way that, flashy, they're pretty, they're my first try, it's the very first time I did their conceptual works, there's a lot of stuff that are about them that are raw, it's every piece I created, I didn't edit it out. As you grow as an artist, you develop your vocabulary, you do a bunch of stuff where, you sort of know what works and what doesn't. You get people to validate you or tell you that's really not so hot, and over time you evolve your career. And to me, as hard as you try, that's not always a treasure, right? It's not the very best piece a Renaissance artist created, the one you see today. The ones that's a treasure is that one that survived that Nazi bomb or wasn't destroyed in a fight between two cousins in the 1800s or didn't get burned in a barn. What survives is what survives, right? So to me, the treasure is that somehow, maybe because I'm a hoarder, I don't know, I I decided not to throw these things away, right, when I was done with them, sort of kept them. And now they stand as a little mark to tell a story about how one guy who grew up in Cuba, Miami, felt about what was supposed to be a really important event that, as of today, really wasn't so important, but maybe 50 years ago from now, will have been a true cross and not a mousetrap that we saw. All right, so thank you. That was my treasure to share. So we have Q&As, right?
We have Q&As, and this reminds me, because I think both of these gentlemen are treasures. They may not think it, but they have been able to take what an African tribe, the Dagara, call Yubangora, that which knowledge cannot eat. And they can take their knowledge, they take their place that is not one specific place, but a mixture of places. And you work it together in a creativity that expresses liberty and freedom and justice and rights. And they're all put together, but it's the layers and the layers and the layers that have to be peeled off almost like an onion to get into, to see. You walk by the artwork and you look at it, and all of a sudden you see something, and then you see something else. And John, when you were explaining the map, the one that you painted of the whole Earth and the explosion
Oh, yeah,
of the uranium, was it the uranium atom?
Yes, yes.
And your idea of the butterflies and the hotshots and the tarantula, it's both of you captivate something in war or moving out of war into an essence that the creativity just shows. And I am just amazed, as I know both of you, I've seen a lot of your artwork, and I understand you have a passion and a drive that makes you a treasure. And I thank you for presenting this to the class.
Well, I thank them for listening. You know, I don't think of myself as a treasure in any way.
I know you do, but I do.
No, I don't know, people, I don't know. But I'm interested if they have any questions, if
Yeah,
they need to stretch
questions.
their legs.
And you're all gonna create now?
Oh, really? What are you guys
Well,
gonna do?
they just wrote letters to their future offspring. It's a work of
Wow.
creativity.
Make sure you burn those because they will use it against you. I want my children to have no evidence of my life. Just those use it against you.
Question? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Mr. Cortada. What made you decide that you wanted to be an artist? When in your life did you realize that, okay, art is for me, it's my passion, it's what I want to do?
That's something I grew up with. There's a professional artist and an artist side, right? So all my life I've been an artist. I'm a lawyer by training to the University of Miami School of Law and Arts. And the graduate school for me to get there, I guess. So I took that path because I wanted to change the world and I wanted to do a lot of advocacy. And right out of law school, my first job was as director of juvenile justice for the University of Miami, their School of Medicine. And we did a lot of research with gangs in Miami, and that got me to travel all over Latin America to talk about the interventions that we created to stop drug abuse and youth violence and to have communities and families work together. Something called multi-systemic family care. We work on that model. Fast forward to 1994, I'm in Soweto, South Africa, right after apartheid ended, using the visual aids that I had used before, because I grew up in a household of artists. My dad and uncle were artists. I was always in art fairs, they owned a gallery. I was always immersed in art, but never as something I thought I was going to do with my career, partially because they didn't really make a strong living out of it, you know. But I sort of grew up in this milieu. But there in Soweto, South Africa, I had a moment where I realized that the visual aid wasn't, the art wasn't just a visual aid, the art was what I was there to do, and that art had a way of '97, I quit all my jobs and was a full-time artist. And it wasn't until last year when FIU hired me. I've been a full-time professional artist from '97. Well, I still am the artist in residence at the college, and I run the Office of Engaged Creativity, which works on using the work I didn't talk to you about today, because my hope is that as honors college students, I'll have other opportunities to talk to you about all the work I do at FIU with native trees, with science, and engaging people to make Miami better. I just wanted to focus on this course, which is why I talk about treasure. But my practice has always been using art as a way of engaging society, the way that people who started migrating out of Africa 60,000 years ago did to create culture in every place they stopped and built community. That art and community and society were part and parcel. And I do find that art has a strong creative element where we're actually, I do find some similarities between scientists and artists, and one is that they both innovate. And I think scientists try to do that. They find truth, but they're also trying to break truth and create new truths. They're trying to break something that's standard and find a new model or a new theory to create something. And I use my art in that way to innovate and to engage and to inspire new ways of thinking and having you see yourself. So Soweto, South Africa in 1994 became a breaking point for me where I said, wow, this thing I'm using here as a tool is the thing. And that's where the tie came off, and I said, I'm going to be honest, instead of a lawyer or a professor.
I have a few questions for you. I've noticed that most of your artwork have Spanish titles. Do you feel more Cuban instead of American, or?
Some of my work has Latin titles because I'm using scientific names of things like species. In this work, I was trying to talk about Cuba, and in some works, like the very last one, the titled one, I use it as a way of naming something's important. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, some people won't title them because they don't want to bring that into the equation of that conversation with every artist. There's a lot of people who look at the title and look at the work. So that's why I like at the title, what you name something has a lot of force. But in these cases, I was trying to have this sort of bilingual dialogue. I was trying to do that, be Cuban, be American, be both, and be neither at the same time. And I did that with the works and also with the titles. So you saw me do that over and over again. But most of the things I titled are, I think in English, I could call myself Javier, but I call myself Xavier. My first language is this one. My spelling's good in both, but better in this one. And I normally title important things in English. But in this case, this is an exhibit of Cuba. So I wanted to use Spanish language. And not just language, but nuances. I wrote that in Samos. Not about experience today is that it's a little fake in that you didn't see the real thing. You saw, I love what John said, you saw that photo, that projection, right, of a piece of art. And you had a narrator at that time, right? So the strength, I think, would be for you to play the spin cycle game and sort of immerse yourself in it and sort of figure out, oh, what's this guy trying to say? In other words, the discovery, trying to figure out, not just having me sit here and narrate the whole thing for you, but sort of experiencing, is a lot of what my engaged practice is about. So a lot of my art is actually about planting trees, and it's a performance piece. It's all about getting the feeling of the word. It's about having you understand that there's something from nature that's not just a pretty picture. So like that, I think artists have different modalities, different ways of engaging or having that conversation I talked about earlier with you. So here it was about something visceral. It was about a bunch of junk, found stuff, referencing what people have been out there doing to create an idea about the island, and I got you to do it.
Yeah, more like a comment. I mean, I'd like to hear what you guys think about it. I just wanted to thank you both for coming, of course. And what I found interesting in both of your respective exhibits, while yours had a specific lesson with Cuba, I did notice that you guys have this, what I think is a really cool habit of sort of melting in the sacred with the mundane. And especially your painting of Miss Piggy and Christ right next to it, and you with the mousetrap, in the form of a cross. I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day. He was telling me that, the sacred and the mundane, they roll together all the time. In time, as time goes on, the apocalypse ever happens, you're still going to have rabbits bouncing around, in a sense. You know what I'm saying? You're still going to have life that what we would consider mundane rolling around, with all these events that we would consider sacred happening.
Well,
or pivotal.
to consider then is that maybe there's no difference between the sacred and the mundane.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. That's exactly what I loved about both of your exhibits, because what I saw is, while that I'm sure is true, and while I do believe that, I think that it points to something greater than both, in a sense. So that's something that I really found interesting from both of your exhibits.
Somebody else have that hand up?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to go back to Xavier Cortada pieces. I know you touched on it. You used a lot of electrical work, it seems, in your pieces. Why was that again?
All right, so it's about, I'm not sure how much I was trying to sort of reference my physics and, courses or whatever, but, when you look at light, you look at energy, mass, energy, it's all a continuum, right? It's electromagnetic these days. So, but I think I was trying to make a more obvious, I was giving a more obvious sort of nod to literally power, right? To political power. So I just wanted to using extension cords and circuits and stuff like that to talk about that, like the charged sort of conversation about electricity.
Both of you have created such powerful words that, when I go up to the 5th floor of the library, up to the 8th, where they
Yeah.
have everything, there are two of John's big paintings up there. And the sad part about it is you can't read the little label, you have to go into that little word to read it. But you can see John's visual image.
Yeah, it's not a self-portrait though.
No,
Yeah.
but I'm looking at you this afternoon, and I'm seeing this outline, and I'm thinking of that painting.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's titled, I forgot.
I forget.
And I think I want to say it's in French, but I could be wrong.
No,
Um,
it's in English.
Is it in
Yeah.
English? It's on the 5th floor. of the
Yeah.
library.
Oh, it's the Miracle of the Manna, that one, yeah.
Oh,
It's
okay, it's big, it's like,
yeah, it's a reinterpretation
3 or 4
of
feet
the
by 6
biblical
feet.
story where, the Jews are starving, so it rains manna, and Poussin did a painting where in the corner of the painting, there's this great miracle where God is feeding these starving people, and whether you take it as a myth or true, whatever, but this one French painter did it where there's 2 guys just totally fighting it out to get some of the manna, so as this, we won't change however great our lives are, so I did a painting where there's a riot and there's little grains falling I much prefer the ambiguous things because I don't feel confident about making any political statements. That painting that I did seems extremely corny to me.
Well, your artwork is political in a lot of ways. I think it speaks to
I think it may ask.
your background.
It may ask. I hope it may ask important questions, but I certainly challenge any notion that it provides answers on how to be a better person or to live a better life, because I think that that's something that somebody needs to find themselves, so that art can perhaps, at least the art I respond to, ask me questions that I think about, but it doesn't provide me answers, because I think when it provides answers very directly, it limits itself into how somebody can interact with it. So I definitely don't want that in my life. That's why it seems really corny, like, oh, we have a great world, but we keep fighting. You know, that I don't want to do something like that.
Your questions?
I got one more. Like, what was your favorite thing that you've done in your career, like art-wise? Your favorite painting, or just out of curiosity? I mean, if you guys have any, or if you don't.
Well, I have some issues where I get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, because as soon as I wake up, and I'm not being contrived or corny here, I actually start thinking like, oh, I've got to finish that part of the painting, and then I can't go back to sleep. So I love waking up at like 4, I make coffee, and then I go paint, and I did that this morning. So the painting that I'm enjoy the most is the ones that I'm working on 10 paintings right now. And so it's the next painting that I think to me is the most exciting. I'm very terrible way of treating former paintings that I've been in relationships with. I immediately and everything about them.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess mine is the Reclamation Project. It probably is. It's a project I did, and some of you may have seen it. It's let's see, in 2000, we have a home in the Keys, and in 2004, they had a bunch of bulldozers mowing down a bunch of mangroves on the 18-mile stretch going to the Keys because people were being killed with head-on collisions. And I got really upset about all these beautiful mangroves being killed. Mangroves are these aquatic plants that diversity. There's a lot of them missing today because of these plants. So I went and started talking to a bunch of scientists and people in Tallahassee and the county, and trying to get a campaign not to kill these plants. We plant them or something. And from that, I started a process where I engaged people in thinking about how to protect them. And what I was worried about is that a few years later, what happened, what eventually happened would have happened, which is you drive on that highway and not realize you were driving on hills of forest, and that every day you make a decision, you assume that nature and humanity are basically what they are today, that there's always been a road here, there's always been a Victoria's Secret there, there's always been, a pedestrian mall, there's always been neon, there's always been concrete, so let's just get rid of this little piece of nature, we'll cut this park in half. They still have half for the birds, but you don't realize that along the way you basically decimated any connection to nature, that all you have left are these little strands that can hardly support life. So I started this project where I would paint mangroves where they used to be before. So we go into the highways, there's these seedlings that look like lizards where mangroves used to be, on the highway. And then I got into a whole process where I would take them and put them in little water-filled cups, like artificial life support all over town wherever there used to be a mangrove forest. So we did that up and down Miami Beach. And then that took hold into this big participatory art practice where at the Bass Museum we created a whole installation and then had people participate in this too. And then the store owners in Lincoln Road created their installations on the road. Then the Miami Science Museum got the whole thing, and it's now a huge 1,100 mangrove vertical garden. And it's in 16 schools. So like all of a sudden there's literally thousands of volunteers who go into the forest to collect mangrove seedlings, who grow vertical gardens, and then plant them. And it's an art piece. And what I love best about it is that it's completely non-traditional. Like people think I'm a landscape architect or something, or that I'm a tree planter. And it's a performative art piece where I'm trying to have people socially sculpt, like Joseph Beuys would teach us to do. That we're all actors trying to create a better world. So to me, that's a cool project that your class exhibited. Actually, I just realized the
Yeah.
Aesthetics and Values class exhibited a long time ago at FIU, and it's had a good run. It's now part of the Miami Science Museum, Miami-Dade College. It has it in every campus. And Florida Everglades coastal research team is doing research around it. So it's just it's an interesting way of creating a process to engage people, to make art and change the world. So yeah, and my work is very much about engaging people and using different ways of thinking creatively about problem solving.
Okay.
So I kind of like that piece because of its scale, right? It's a piece that has been around since '04, that has a bunch of iterations. I don't even know, literally, they're made and I'm not even involved. Like someone else is making them, like there's a whole community effort around it. And I mean, it's got a bunch of tension around it, but it feels like a really solid piece there.
Thank you.